Wellity. Time for episode 35. With you as always, me, Chucky, from the forums, and we've got Jigsaw.
How are you doing tonight?
Are you asking me or them?
Combination thereof.
Okay.
Okay. One day I'll come up with one that's not awkward introduction, but
Yeah.
it's not today.
We've had 35 episodes, and
Hey, I'll get it one of these times.
anyways, another lineup of 5 movies. What have we got for today?
Indeed. We start off with the, I would say, somewhat modern classic Eden Lake from 2008. Then we follow that up with a zombie movie that I don't hear that many people talk about, titled The Dad Next Door from 1989. Then we have somewhat of a sci-fi classic, Total Recall from 1990. Then we have Insidious Chapter 2 from 2013, and we spoke about the first Insidious some episodes back. And we finish up tonight with probably one of the most classic horror movies out there, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974.
Alright, well, let's get things started with Eden Lake from 2008. So we've got Jenny and Steve. They head to a lake to spend a peaceful, romantic weekend together. However, a group of undisciplined teenagers ruin their weekend with continuous pranks, and it eventually escalates into something a whole lot worse and more violent and deadly. Okay, so this is a movie, I've seen this movie quite a few times now. I remember seeing it roughly around the time it came out. I've had it on Blu-ray since then, pretty much. And overall, I think it is a very good movie, but it's also a very tough movie.
Yeah.
There's just so many scenes in this movie that are just so hard to endure. Like, there's torture scenes, there's a scene like where she's running away and she's runs onto this spike in the ground. You know, they have to face with being possibly being burnt alive, and all these kind of things that happen in the movie. And to be honest, it's a movie that hardly ever lets up. Just when you think things are going to get better, it just takes 2 steps backwards. Yeah, it's just such a tough movie to endure. Before I get into more details about it, though, what are your general thoughts?
Yeah,
on this?
I pretty much feel the same. It's a well-made movie. Everything in the movie looks nice, fantastic performances. It's not the easiest movie to enjoy. It's a somewhat harrowing experience. Mainly because I feel like you can't necessarily, at some point during the escalation between the kids and this couple, there's sort of been some point where they took a step back, hey, let's not do this. Probably when the guy went into the kid's house. But it's such a interesting idea because, well, they're just kids. I mean, kids are harmless, right? Not so much. I mean, these are some sadistic kids.
They're a bunch of bogan wankers.
They're like straight savage. Like, especially, there's another kid who wants to join the little gang type thing, and well, he doesn't necessarily join, sort of gets fired in a way. But I mean, these kids have like no empathy aside from the kid with the dog. He really likes that dog. So he got a little sympathy from me then. But I mean, talk about a bunch of unlikable kids, and of course, I suspect most of us know the ending, and talk about sort of a gut punch there.
Yeah. It's one of those movies where you just feel like it's one big kick to the balls. There's pretty much no hope in the movie at all. Oh, well, there might be hope, but it always gets squashed.
Yeah, there's a little hope toward the end when she finally gets a ride, but then it's not quite as it seems, and it's just disappointing.
Yeah. So, I guess maybe I'll just try and work my way through this movie and just highlight whatever points I can from it. First off, let's begin with how shitty their music was when they're at the lake, where they've got their tunes blasting. I don't know what the hell they were listening to, but it sounded like crap.
It was not my style.
And one other thing, who the hell goes scuba diving in a lake? I mean, I don't see anyone else do that.
Yeah, I noticed that. That was so random. Because it just pops up in that one scene.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a tank and everything. I mean, okay. Anyways, as we go through towards the earlier stages of the movie, well, they get a flat tire and they know that the kids kind of did it, so the guy, he sees his kids kind of roaming around the town as they're driving around, and he seems to really want to have a strict talk with their parents, and he eventually notices their bikes parked outside their house, and he goes to, I guess, talk to the parents, and they've got the doors open and no one's really coming to the door when he's yelling hello and stuff, so he decides to go inside, which I think was a pretty terrible decision. It's just something I would never do. Like, I wouldn't start roaming around someone's house just because they're not coming to the door. I mean, you could just leave it alone, you could just leave. I mean, that was a pretty stupid situation to put himself in.
Yeah, I just keep thinking back to that one line he says. I'm not going to be boarded away by a bunch of 12-year-old kids. Like, dude, just go, just move. There's a big lake. Move to the other side. It's cool.
Yeah. Was it worth it?
Like, that type of, I don't know if it's a pride or ego type thing, but just do it, dude. I don't think the girlfriend's going to think any less of you because of that.
Yeah. These kids and their parents say, I mean, these types of people, they're fairly normal. I mean, in Australia, we essentially call these types of people bogans. So they're essentially, people who swear a lot. They might dress down quite a lot, and usually lower class people. And it's not necessarily that they're bad people. They're just really rough around the edges and maybe do a lot of stupid things. And obviously things go too far in this movie and they start doing things that are beyond just bad.
Yeah, it's interesting because toward the end of the movie, we get to see one of the main kids' fathers, and just seeing the way that father treats a kid, even, just a little short scene. But, I mean, there comes a point, and I think that's partially what this movie is, how much of how the kids became is their own doing. I mean, the upbringing that they may have had, falling into that type of hoodlum lifestyle. I mean, maybe it was one of the only possibilities they could have gotten. It's depressing, which is pretty much what this movie is. Especially, I think it's really interesting because the main character is a teacher. I don't know what, it's like pretty young kids that she was teaching, but just having a teacher have to deal with this type of scenario. And you can see the remorse after that one scene in which she was defending herself. Well, she thought she was defending herself. Speaking of which, I wonder what that kid was going to say. Like, hey, I'm sorry that we screwed, your vacation up.
I don't know what he would have said, but it's obviously he was going to not hurt her, at least in that situation. Who knows? He might have helped her get away or something. I don't know
if he would have had that type of bravery, to be honest, but it's a nice thought. Actually, another reminds me of another interesting aspect of this, which is between the kids, a sort of peer pressure to peer under. The main kid is the main guy behind this. The others are sort of, they're not forced into it, but it's one of those situations like, hey, if these are the only friends I have, I might as well follow along, and that has repercussions, throughout the movie. And there are multiple times when different, kid characters don't really want to go through with this stuff, and it's just sort of interesting dynamics. And I mean, obviously the kids are horrible for doing what they're doing. Especially since they sort of instigated the whole thing to begin with. But I mean, it's just difficult. I do want to mention probably one of my favorite scenes is once the what's her name, Johnny, finds Steve and sort of drags him to this little small cabin. Then they sort of have to hide under the cabin in sort of like a marshy water type thing where the kids are up in the cabin, which is a pretty tense scene, especially when one of the kids breaks through the somewhat rotten wall.
You fat fuck.
Those accents crack me up. But especially because, that guy has so many open wounds, and then that water getting into this wound. I mean, he was screwed anyway, but that's just those are difficult wounds, and that's probably one of the hardest scenes for me, especially because I think both of them know that he may not make it.
Yeah. I can't recall who the actress is in this movie. I didn't actually look it up again, but... And this might be, like, not the right time to mention this sort of thing, but there's so many shots where they're showing her cleavage and boobies bouncing around, so I kind of appreciated that.
The question is, why is it not the right time to mention?
You didn't notice this? Like, I don't know if the dress she's wearing and everything else, they're just, like, kind of bouncing around.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the actress, but she was certainly an attractive woman. Well, for the most part, toward the end she was a bit messed up, but that's not really her doing.
You'd still hit it.
I'm not saying no.
The house that she ends up at the end seems to be the same house that they visited earlier in the film, so I'm not expecting her to have been thinking about that or remember that or anything when she does kind of go back and crash there or whatever she does there. But if she had kind of recalled, hey, this is a house where these kids were before, maybe I shouldn't go to this house.
Yeah, I think her idea was that as soon as she hits quote-unquote civilization, she'll be okay. Which is disappointing. I mean, talk about an ending that you just... I mean, it makes sense in context of the story, but you just hate to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, so Eden Lake, it's a tough movie to watch, but it's never boring. It's always got things going on. Dislikable characters, but that's the actual point of the movie, I guess. So it does a really good job with that. Even though there's quite a bit of violence in the movie, I think the more disturbing thing is just the events in the film that happen rather than the actual violence itself. So, it's kind of impressive what they've done with technically so little. I think it's a solid 8 out of 10.
Yeah, and I am actually going to concur with that rating in 8 out of 10. Eden Lake is I think it's a very solid movie. It's not like a whole lot of distractions. It's pretty much, hey, she's fighting for her life throughout this whole movie. And it's just a solid time. It's not the happiest movie. And I sort of wonder how many people went into this movie, jubilant and came out with their spirits crushed. But that's more of the power of it. So, yeah, I think an 8 out of 10 is pretty fair. And if for some reason you've not seen this movie, I would certainly recommend checking it out.
Yeah. If even for the bouncing booblers.
If that is indeed your thing, by all means. And whose thing is it? Let's be honest.
That's right, you fat fuck.
Speaking of zombies, next up we have The Dad Next Door from 1989, which is a bit of a interesting movie, shall we say. Basically, a zombie pandemic begins, and then flash forward a few years, and this is like anti-zombie squads, going around trying to kill off zombies. I guess they're so inept, but I guess that's what they're doing. Then they go to try to find this cure for zombieism, so they go to this small town in Ohio. They run across a religious cult and some more zombies and a mystery and all this stuff. So, I want to preface anything by saying I had known about this movie for quite some time. Like, I've known about this movie for years, I've just never seen it until a few days ago. I had no idea how low quality it was. The budget on this has to be, well, I'll be surprised if it surpassed the most modest of budgets. And the most amazing thing about this, my view, is I generally hear positive things about it. Like right now it has like 5.1 I think on IMDb, so it's even as above a 5, it just blows my mind. It's a low budget zombie movie. It's not a particularly it might be enjoyable, but it's not particularly good. And you have some decent puzzle effects, and I'll throw the movie that much. But you have to go through this mystery that's not that intriguing, and these characters who you pretty much don't care about whatsoever, and some acting that is, well, it's not even acting, it's just shit. Like it's difficult. So I have a few things to say, some good, mostly negative, about this movie. But before I plaster you out with those words, what did you think about this one?
Well, I remember, like a really long time ago, during the earlier stages of the Fight Evil website, I think it was Derailer, he mentioned this movie a couple of times, and yeah, I mean, I'm not huge on zombie movies, so I didn't check it out until many years later. That they had this, I think they crowdfunded a release of this movie on Blu-ray. So the actual guy that made this movie, he seems to have his own, I don't know if he has his own production company for releasing other movies, but apparently he released his own movie under his own company name as a Blu-ray release. They did this big 3-disc Ultimate Edition set. I have that set. It's signed by the guy that made the movie and everything, so it's a really good set. It's got the soundtrack on one disc. It's got like a fully restored, best quality version that you can put on a Blu-ray disc, and then it's also got a third disc which has like a original DVD version and also an original VHS version, which I guess has maybe different scenes or different gore in it, or I'm not exactly sure. I actually went last night to watch this movie again for the purpose of doing this show. I put the disc in, and for like the HD version, which is not exactly HD, but it's, you know, it's the best quality you'll get for this movie. And it kept coming up with unknown disc. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And after a few times trying that, I have a look at the disc and I can see a very fine crack in it. So, fuck. I couldn't watch that disc, so I had to watch one of the other versions on one of the other discs. So I had the choice of either watching the DVD version or the VHS version. And on the disc it actually says DVD version 78 minutes, VHS version 82 minutes. So, okay. VHS version, just because it's the longest version, and you know, I'm guessing, I don't know if that's the most uncut version, but there you go. So that's the version I watched, and you know, I prefer to watch my movies in the highest quality possible, so maybe, I don't know if that was the greatest idea, but hey, what other choice did I have? And kind of like you, yes, the movie is pretty shit. The acting is pretty shit. I mean, if it weren't for the effects in this movie, I don't think anyone would care about this movie. And I'm not going to say they're the most realistic effects, but they are really enjoyable effects for like a B-grade film lover. And you can definitely get some enjoyment out of that. But if you're watching this movie and there's no effects being shown on the screen, none of that good stuff, I'm just really not interested at all. It's a difficult one to rate because I'm a little all over the place with it.
I guess on the upside, we do get characters named after classic horror-related people, so that's always fun. There's Romero and King and Carpenter and Raimi. It's fantastic.
And Savini, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's horrible. I always hated that type of thing. Aside from Night of the Creeps, which was okay.
And the guy that plays Raimi, I mean, his voice just kept being very familiar to me, so I had to, like, just double check, like, who is this guy? And then, obviously, I realized Bruce Campbell's doing the voice. So, that's another thing that might give some enjoyment to someone out there, but to be honest, I'm not the biggest Evil Dead guy, so the Raimi thing, the Bruce Campbell thing, it doesn't really do all that much for me. Might do some things for other people, you know, they might like the fan service with some of these kind of homages and things, or references, you know, whatever they put in the movie that you can kind of track back to other bigger or more likable movies, and you might get something out of that, but I didn't.
I guess on the upside, we do get some pretty solid dialogue. You know, I'm a zombie now, man. Or the other classic, it is my religion that is right. The delivery of that line, by the way, was probably some of the worst in the movie. But yeah, it's like I said, it can be amusing to watch, but when you have to watch the whole thing, it's a little bit of a challenge. And also, I just want to reiterate that for a bunch of zombie hunters, these have to be some of the most inept people I've ever seen. Like, they constantly leave themselves open to be either bitten or attacked by zombies. Like, they have no military efficiency. Like, they have no idea what they're doing. It's apparently been this way in this civilization for, I think it was maybe 2 years or so. So they should know better by now. Like, the beginning, when that guy just happened to have his, hand, I think, in the zombie's mouth, and then, decapitated hand, and he gets bitten. Like, come on, don't leave your hand in somebody's mouth, and then look away and talk to someone.
Yeah. The only thing in the movie really to really recommend to people are the somewhat enjoyable effects, and of which there is plenty throughout the movie. I mean, there's always a lot of like biting and fucked up zombie faces and all kinds of stuff coming out of their heads, but outside of that, I mean, the movie just doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, I have to say, I think most of the effects are decent for the budget they had. But I have to say the most memorable one's probably that one toward the end with that one character getting ripped apart. Which I thought was that character was a pretty dick character to begin with. So seeing him getting ripped apart was pretty satisfying. Yeah, but otherwise, I mean, unless you're interested in some, how would religion play into a zombie society, maybe this movie can quench your thirst for that. But otherwise, I don't know if there's much going here. I'm just going to give this one a somewhat mediocre rating, but then again, save for these special effects, it's not a particularly great movie. So I'm going to throw this one a 4 out of 10. It was a difficult movie to watch, and it's not even a particularly long movie, but it's as enjoyable as some of the dialogue might be, and as horrible as the story is. It's just not a movie I can imagine myself watching anytime again soon.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways for me to rate this, and I'm going to kind of rate them separately, then combine them for one final rating. So I'll give the movie like a 9 out of 10 for the effects side of things. Like they're really enjoyable. But the actual movie itself, take all the effects out of it, it becomes a 2 out of 10. So combining those together is 11. Divide that by 2, 5.5. And I'll round that down. I'll give it a 5 out of 10 overall.
So this was math time with Chucky.
Yeah. I should have added like trigonometry or some bullshit in there, but
I am happy that you did not.
Yeah, but much like the zombies, I'm a bit brain dead.
That's classic.
Let's move on to Total Recall from 1990, in which Arnie plays Douglas Quaid, a man with an infatuation about Mars. He dreams about it a lot, and would really like to go live there for some weird reason. His supposed wife doesn't want to... she doesn't want to go there, so he learns about a place called Recall, which offers fake memory implants. And, he goes there, gets a treatment, so he could at least have a nice memory of having visited Mars. And they also offer an alternative identity, so instead of traveling to Mars as a tourist in this memory, he could instead have spent his time there as a secret agent, which has people trying to kill him at almost every turn. Sounds like a wonderful vacation. But, there seems to be complications during the memory implant process, and, well, the only question remains, the events of the movie, is this just the memory he bought, or is everything actually really happening? Is he really this person with this other identity? So, anyways, it's a very classic movie. It's a movie I've seen so many times. I began watching it roughly not too long after it was released, so I saw this a lot even as a little kid. And hey, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. How can you hate it? I mean, even if the movie is stupid as fuck, just having Arnie on there, he's just got that level of charisma where almost, not everything, but almost everything he's in is at least somewhat enjoyable or watchable. So yeah, I think this is it's a very good movie. It's a fun sci-fi action movie. Lots of decent characters, memorable characters, decent actors. There's a lot to like about the movie. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, so this is a movie, and this may not surprise anybody who knows me, but this is a movie I had not seen before. Not only had I not seen it before, I didn't know jack shit about it. I heard the name, no idea what it was about. I didn't even know Schwarzenegger was in it, to be honest. I had no idea. So I went into this one pretty blind. I was actually at times reminded of The Matrix, which is actually a sci-fi movie I've seen. There's a few things, the whole like reality shifting nature of the memories going on, and I thought this movie, I thought it was pretty decent. My I guess biggest gripe with it, if I had to come up with a main gripe, is that I feel like if it was made maybe 6 years later, they could have maybe made it look a bit better. I'm not saying the movie looks particularly bad. I mean, I'm sure they did the best that they could, but I could definitely tell it was an early 90s movie. And I guess that, that might not be necessarily a negative thing, but it certainly felt dated in some aspects to me. And, I enjoyed the story enough, but throughout the whole movie, I just couldn't help but, see this as what it was, just an early 90s sci-fi movie.
Well, it to me it feels more late 80s, and I mean it's released in 1990, so I'm assuming it was at least in production at some point in 1989.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just, I mean, like I said, it's not a negative, but you can certainly tell. Like it's funny because actually just a few days before I watched Total Recall, I happened to watch The Matrix again. So seeing like an early 2000s sci-fi movie pit against like a early 90s, like it's like a world of difference. I mean, both of them are philosophically interesting. And I really like the idea behind the memory implants in Total Recall. I actually, as soon as he heard the advertisement on, I think it was a train, I actually paused the movie to think about it for a few minutes. Because it's such an interesting concept. You get a weeks full of memories that you didn't actually have to spend the time to acquire. It's just such an interesting idea, and it's a shame it didn't work out a bit better.
I really like the opening theme music to the movie. Really gets you going.
Yeah, it's decent, and actually that does remind me. There was one part of the movie that did annoy me a bit. Like I said, this is first time watching, but this is seen about maybe halfway through or so, in which a guy claiming to be a doctor comes up to Schwarzenegger's character, says, "Hey, something went wrong with the memory thing. You're just going, through some mental," I forget that phrase he used, but basically he's having the breakdown, and he was supposed to bring him back to the quote-unquote real world, and everything up to that point had been, just part of this machine and fake memories. It was an interesting idea. The problem was that we had already seen as an audience scenes from outside of his perspective, and those are scenes that Schwarzenegger's character wasn't, he didn't know, for instance, that the guys were tracking him, that he had a tracker in his head until he was told by another character. And I think there's also a scene in the boardroom with the RoboCop homeboy. So there's just scenes from outside his perspective that we never would have known, and he definitely didn't know about. So that made the whole thing, oh hey, this thing's all been fake, it just made it fall a little flat for me. I mean, it was an interesting idea, I just can't imagine many people falling for it.
I'd fall for it.
Oh, okay.
Look, I like to think of this movie as it is actually all a dream, and he's just really like lobotomized by the end of it, and I like to go with that thought.
Yeah, I did notice, and I read a little bit online after it, but I haven't had that much time to dig deep into it. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff online about this movie. I did notice though, I think it was early in the movie he mentioned something about Mars having a blue sky, and then of course toward the end after what happens it has a blue sky, and I did think that was I thought it was interesting. So I can definitely, I don't have an opinion one way or the other on whether or not those are fake, but I thought this is enough evidence to point in that way that I would have a problem with people thinking that.
Yeah, well, one other thing that we have to discuss, because I remember when we talked about Deadly Blessing, you were like, you had no idea who Sharon Stone is, and you still have no idea.
Oh yeah, she's in this movie?
Oh yeah, she's in this movie. Oh yeah. She plays Arnold's supposedly fake wife?
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And this is her in her prime. So, shame on Jigsaw.
I'm okay with that. She was when she was doing that whole Tannis thing. That was a decently. I mean, let's just say I wouldn't mind if she banged my ball.
Yeah. Well, you know, she's doing the whole "you can tie me up if you want," and she's been real kinky.
Although I do have to say, after I probably think the other woman, I think her character's name is Elena, something like that. I think she was probably a bit more attractive, but that's just my personal preference. I may be entirely wrong, but I'm used to that.
Look, I can definitely see both as attractive. I would still go for Sharon Stone.
Now the real question is who's more attractive, Schwarzenegger or Michael Ironside?
No.
Okay.
No, we are not going to debate
Question
that.
for the ages.
Why, do you have an answer for that?
Not so much, no.
Yeah, I'll go back to talking about the cast of this movie. I mean, obviously people are familiar with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I thought everyone was familiar with Sharon Stone. Michael Ironside. We've got Ronnie Cox, who's from RoboCop. In fact, if you're not aware, the guy that made this movie, also his first sci-fi movie he made was RoboCop.
Oh, I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I actually watched an interview with him after watching this movie because it's on the Blu-ray, and he's going on about how he'd never really done any kind of sci-fi movies before, and his wife kind of pushed him to do RoboCop. To be honest, he didn't really want to do it. He thought it was a bit of a stupid idea, and apparently his wife pushed him to do it, and supposedly, based on the reaction he got from that, then he started getting sci-fi scripts from everywhere, and he didn't even really have interest in doing sci-fi, but I think they said something like he was getting all these scripts, and he got the script for Total Recall, and they gave him like this 3-hour ultimatum after receiving the script by a courier and saying, like, you've got 3 hours after receiving the script to say you're going to do it. and apparently they already told him, look, Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to be in this movie. He's going to do it whether you make it or not. And I don't know, for whatever reason, he's like, yeah, let's do it. And apparently the only thing later on after signing on to do it that he had reservations about was the fact that had been like the 42nd revision of the script. So, and he said they still didn't really have a way to end the movie. So he was a bit worried about that. But it eventually kind of came up with stuff, and it's all good. Sorry, I sidetracked into talking about the director now, but I was originally talking about the cast. But there's a lot of other smaller roles in the movie by people who you probably have seen in other things. Now, some of them I can't even remember the names for. Like the guy with the messed up face, you know, the guy who says to Arnie, you've got a lot of nerve showing your face around here. I know I've seen that actor, like I looked him up on IMDb, I've seen him in a whole bunch of other things before, I don't remember his name. And, you know, like, you got the little midget woman, Debbie Lee Carrington, who I think unfortunately she passed away a few years ago, but a lot of people would be familiar with her in some movies and stunt work she does. You know, she's the real life stunt double for Tiffany in the Chucky movies.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so there's a few of these different people scattered all over the place that you would have seen in other things. May not necessarily know all their names, like I, where I forget all their names. But yeah, it's even the the black guy that plays Benny, the cab driving alien. it's just interesting because I looked him up, see what else he's had involvement with, and I noticed he was a producer on one of your favorite horror movies, Killjoy.
Ah, that's a horrible guy then. Although I do have to say his demise is pretty quality.
Yeah. So, just a lot of interesting different people in the movie and different things they've done.
Yeah, I'll just say I do think it's interesting that I don't even remember the guy, the RoboCop guy. I think it's interesting that he throughout the movie kept trying to get his old friend back. The guy that Schwarzenegger used to be, but of course it could never work. So he eventually just had to give up that dream. And so that was a bit interesting. And I also want to point out, this, as far as I can tell, assuming if what we saw was accurate, this whole thing went down just because this guy is power hungry and just wants to make more money. So that's some quality political allegory right there. I mean, everybody could have been okay if he just turned that machine on, but no, he's doing his own thing. Guess screw the people.
Yeah. One other thing, just before I rate it, one other thing that I almost forgot to mention, but I don't know how I could forget to mention this, is we need to talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger's balls in this movie, because they take a lot of damage. There's multiple scenes in the movie where he gets hit in the dick. I think he gets kicked in the balls. Actually, a couple of times. It's usually a kick to the balls. I mean, in fact, there's a funny video on YouTube. I don't know what it's called or what, but it's kind of putting together clips from this movie of Arnold Schwarzenegger taking testicular damage, and it kind of ends with this one, the scene towards the end of the movie where they're kind of returning these two characters to, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character back to the asshole that he used to be, and they're going to turn her into like his obedient wife or girlfriend or whatever. And she says something like, "I'll break his balls." And they have that on this clip after him getting hit in the nuts so many times. They end it with, "I'm gonna break his balls." I don't know, it's just funny, and I certainly feel for Arnie's nads in this movie.
I mean, really, he went through the ringer pretty much throughout the whole thing. You just have to feel bad for the guy.
I'll just summarize this by saying, good movie. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. It's a classic from my childhood, and like I said, it's Arnie. It's the director of RoboCop. There's a lot of good things happening in here, a lot of enjoyable things. It's a roller coaster ride with, I think, a fairly decent plot. I don't see how you could really hate the movie, so it's good for me.
Yeah, I think it's a decent movie. Interesting, very interesting idea. I was happy to see it. I did love the movie, but I could definitely watch it again. And I don't know, it's overall a pretty fun time. Plus, we did even mention, I'm surprised Tracky didn't mention it, but you also have some women with breasts, so it's always good stuff.
Well, yeah, the fact that you didn't know who Sharon Stone was, and you chose someone else over her in this movie.
I know. I'm a disappointing guy.
I mean, I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure she had the bigger boobies too, so that's another reason why I would choose Sharon Stone.
Okay, so I think I'm going to throw this movie a 7 out of 10, which is my average rating, but I could see that going either up or down if I see this one again. It's certainly not a bad movie, and like I said, it is nice to finally see a movie. It's pretty good stuff. That's all I have.
I guess Jiggy likes his women to be demure.
Yeah, actually, that's another interesting thing. The exact same type of woman pops. A lot of interesting things in this movie, and I am a demure woman type guy, which could be taken wrong. But speaking of taking things wrong,
What?
We have... I know, some of my segues make no sense, but that makes them all the more fun. Speaking of movies that aren't that great, we have Insidious Chapter 2 up next, which pretty much follows directly after the first Insidious, in which the medium woman played by Lynn Shay had been... Well, she died at the end of the first movie. So they're trying to figure out, they being the police, try to figure out who killed her. The family tries to move on. The father, Patrick Wilson's character, has been acting a bit odd. The wife may not necessarily trust him. There's some strange happenings going on again. And they believe that there's more spirits from the father coming after them. And it's... I'll be honest, I actually like this movie a bit more than the first one, and I'm not entirely sure why.
What the fuck?
I know. But that is, I actually just watched this earlier today, but I actually did, I did love the movie, and I still think it's a somewhat below average movie, but I do think I found it more enjoyable. But before I try to piece that together, let's hear your praises, Chucky.
Well, look, I still think this movie's decent, but for anyone out there who hasn't watched our discussion from the first movie, I actually really liked the first movie. I gave it a 9 out of 10. I think it's a super creepy movie, and even though I'm not someone who dislikes when they make sequels, I feel like the original movie would have been better off not having any sequels. And that's because this movie goes into more about the... What do they call the character? The Black Bride character.
I think it's just a woman and... it's something, I forget.
Yeah. I found that character incredibly creepy from the first movie, and it was mainly because there was just so much mystery around the character. Like, you know nothing really about that character. And now, to bring it here, okay, it's a cross-dressing guy with mummy issues. I mean, it doesn't necessarily ruin the character. I didn't really care for that explanation for the character. I still find the character creepy despite it, but I don't know, I feel like it less is more in that case. I mean, I've seen all the Insidious movies at the theater except for the first one, which sucks because the first one's the best one. But all the other, there's no bad Insidious movies. They just range from to good, and I think this one is still probably the second best in the series. I know some people actually kind of prefer the third one over this one. The third one's very similar in terms of enjoyment to this one, at least for me. But I think the reason why I still kind of like this one over the third is because this one still has so much more ties to the first movie. And in a way, this movie does a decent job of kind of tying things in with events that happened in the first movie. Like, when you watch the first movie, things like where they hear knocks on their doors and their doors opening at certain points, and I mean, you can just play that off as, okay, something supernatural is happening, and, we see movies all the time where a door will open and, it's not really for any reason, but when you watch this second movie, they actually show it's actually for a reason. Either that or they just cleverly came up with these ideas that seem to seamlessly integrate itself into events from the first movie. Which is kind of impressive, but at the same time, like I said, less is more, and now whenever I watch that first movie, I'm gonna know things that happened from, that we see in the second movie, and I don't know, it's good, but also annoying.
Yeah, I have to say, I was somewhat impressed with the way they sort of tied in the small things. I did like them. A lot of this movie... Well, not a lot, but they throw some flashbacks into back when Patrick Wilson's character was a kid dealing with his own issues. And I thought it was really interesting the way they went through this story. I mean, I guess my main problem is I'm just not blown away by any of it. I was somewhat bored toward the beginning. Things picked up around maybe the halfway mark or so. And I thought there were some legitimately creepy scenes. But then after toward the end, I started feeling my interest drain a bit. But I did want to mention one scene that I did particularly enjoy, being the kid sleeping on the can on his tree scene. You know, when he hears the voice and he assumes it's his brother. It's not. And you just see it, that other side of the can string leading into the closet. It's creepy. It may not have the best conclusion, but I thought it was a decently creepy scene. So I guess kudos to that.
Yeah, I like the house in the movie. Like it's just a creepy house to be in as well, especially when they add all those extra things like the red lighting. I mean, you just walk down the stairs and it's just all red, and yeah, I mean, you've got the creepy "Don't you dare" lady and "Don't you dare."
I actually thought that was somewhat laughable the first time it happened.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not aware, the lady that plays that character, she is the same actress from Curse of Chucky, the sister that is having like their lesbian relationship.
So you also have these interesting tidbits.
Yeah. I don't really know her from anything else, but obviously we both like Curse of Chucky, so we'll know her from that. I think this movie has decent actors in it. I mean, Patrick Wilson's pretty good. I think Rose Byrne's a good actress. Lynn Shaye's good. I think it's great to see like older actors get bigger roles in movies who weren't necessarily really famous people. And yeah, I mean, I like the dynamic between the two ghost hunter type guys, Tucker and what's the other guy's now?
Sparks, I think.
Specs, that's it. Yeah. A lot of Australian flavour in the movie too, because it's directed by an Australian, it's written by an Australian, it's got at least, to my memory, 3 different Australian actors in it.
Yeah, I just thought it was sort of funny, that argument. Rather than safe word, one guy thought it should be unicorn, and he somehow thought unicorn would be easy to bring up in the conversation, which I thought was
quesadilla.
Yeah, I thought that was like, I mean, I can much more understand quesadilla than unicorn. It just struck me as rather amusing.
I agree that I could probably work quesadilla in better, but still, I mean, I've never in my life anyone heard say, "Hey, it's quesadilla time." I mean,
yeah, that example may not have been the best example.
Yeah. Maybe a taco or something if you want to go with some sort of Mexican food, but
that actually does lead me to one other thing I want to give this movie credit for. I thought the scene with the other medium type guy, Carl. I thought the scene when he was talking to Patrick Wilson's.
Yeah. I've also got the note that's like probably my favorite creepy scene in the movie, where he's doing the smiles and stuff.
Yeah, like that, and there's a lot of tension in that scene. I think it's a very well done scene. I think it's somewhat ridiculous. Oh, he's holding a knife, big surprise. But I do think overall that's a pretty tense scene.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the highlight scenes for me in the movie. Even though I'm not necessarily hugely fond of the whole possession type thing overall that's happening, I think that scene, that's a very good scene.
Yeah, there were times when I was a bit reminded of, I think it was the Amityville Horror remake. I mean, it's obviously that movie's a lot more aggressive in its nature, but just the father being possessed and acting aggressive toward the family. So it wasn't unique, but I was just reminded of that.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention is I thought they did and sometimes movies do a horrible job at this, but I thought this movie did a pretty good job, towards that opening scene of having actors and actresses that really do feel like they resemble younger versions of their older characters in the movie. Obviously, I have to assume Lin Shaye did voiceovers for that actress at the beginning, playing her younger self, but, I can see these people growing up to look like these older people.
Yes.
Oh, come on, what's wrong with that comment?
To be honest, I almost never noticed things like that. I remember that came up in the, I think it was It Chapter 2 conversation.
Yeah.
And I also remember not really noticing it then either.
Well, yeah, I thought they did a good job casting in that movie in terms of getting people who could kind of resemble those kids. But, to be honest, I haven't watched It Chapter 2 since I saw it that once in the theaters, which is very surprising.
Yeah, it's funny because it's the exact same with me.
Yeah, but the thing is, I gave that movie, the first chapter, a 10 out of 10, so you would have thought I'd be all over the second one, watch it multiple times. I've watched the first chapter 5-6 times at least. I haven't bothered to watch the second one since the theater. And that was, over a year ago? I've got it on Blu-ray, I just don't watch it. So...
Well, that's deeply encouraging.
Just goes to show how disappointing that second one was. Even though it's not technically a bad movie, it's just disappointing compared to the first. Anyways, back to Insidious 2. I still like this movie enough, but I do think it takes a little bit of a step back from the first movie. I think the first movie is just really creepy, because we don't really know too much about all these creepy characters, and this one just explains too much for me, to the point where it kind of takes the air out of some of those characters. So I'm going to give this one a 7. I still find it to be a decent movie, it just doesn't exactly take the right turns for me.
Yeah, so I don't think this is significantly better or worse. Well, I think it's a little better, but it's not significantly different from the first movie. It does feel almost a little more traditional in its the way they try to scare the audience. It just felt almost more Hollywood streamlined type thing, type feeling for it. It's okay, I guess. It's just there's very few times in the story I was actually really interested. I thought the whole mystery behind, hey, what's this malevolent spirit? No, I thought that was maybe a bit more of the interesting portions, but even then, it didn't entirely grab me. So I think I gave the first Insidious a 5.5, and I probably rounded that up to a 6. I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. So I like it a bit more. It's still another movie I really enjoyed. But hey, if I'm lucky, maybe Insidious 3 will be what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
My hopes are not high.
For the last movie of today's show, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Which is about, we've got Sally, Franklin, and their 3 friends. They take a trip to Outback, Texas to visit an old family home. And one by one, they're tormented and killed by a chainsaw-wielding killer and his cannibalistic family. Everyone kind of knows about this movie, I guess. Whether they have seen it or not, it's one of those just movies that everyone has to know about by now. At least if they've got some enjoyment from the horror genre, they've come across at least the title of this movie or seen clips of it. And it's a low budget 70s movie that just very raw, gritty. I grew up in an area that was very much similar to these locations. It really takes me back to where I grew up, and even that alone makes it somewhat enjoyable for me. But because it's so low budget, raw and gritty, I can't say that it feels real, but it just feels not so movie-like, if that makes any sense. Like the scene where Leatherface is chasing Sally, it just feels like such an unconventional chase scene because they're just literally running after each other for so long through a bunch of trees and bushy areas or whatever. It's just so different to most other movies out there, in my opinion.
Yeah, so this is a movie that I've obviously seen multiple times. Not nearly as much as I've seen, let's say Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, but I've seen it a fair amount of times, and it's one of those horror classics that many seem to respect, and I definitely respect the movie. It has a fantastically gritty feel, and I can't think of another movie that feels quite as gritty as this one is. And of course, Leatherface, even though he's not really the main antagonist, he is pretty iconic, and that his opening scene it's just fantastic. You're just going around this house and then he just pops out, sort of drags the guy in and slams the door. That's a fantastic introduction to this guy.
Props to the actor that did the flailing on the floor. That's the part that I think really sells that scene. Mwah.
Yeah, it's like the whole, like, I think it's a pretty much a 5-minute sequence, but it's just, and also I want to mention Marilyn Bones, who plays Sally. Toward the end of the movie, like the last, let's say, 15 minutes, once she gets sort of, I guess, trapped and taken back to the house for the dinner party, as it was. I mean, she's pretty much going insane right there. Like, the madness that, she's conveying through screams and wails is just fantastic. And, like, that whole scene, the dysfunctional family, the grandfather who's somehow alive, even though he looks half a corpse himself. The whole thing's creepy. It's unsettling, and even the ending when she escapes, and we have that famous scene, with Leatherface trying to catch her but not able to. Like, even if she survives, and she probably does, she's pretty much screwed for life. Like, there's no way you can go through something like that and come out okay.
I feel sorry for that black dude because he just kind of runs off and
yeah. I was wondering about that myself. Like, where's he going? Like, he could have just stuck around it or jumped in the back of the truck with Sally. So yeah, he probably gets away because Leatherface, hit his leg, so he might not be in his best chasing mood. So
they should do like a spin-off movie titled that truck driver who ran away from Leatherface, and then it starts with him just running on the highway and then goes from there.
I think the unfortunate thing is if there's a black guy running down a Texas street, he's not going to be running down the Texas street for long, so it might not make for a overly involved movie. So I guess I say all of that just to preface the fact that even though I deeply respect the movie, with as many times that I've seen it, I've never really enjoyed the movie. I think it's iconic in many ways, and I think it's for the budget they had, I think it's a fantastic idea, but it's such a gritty movie, and we have to deal with characters like Franklin. I get it, the guy has issues, but he annoys me so much.
I will say, and I know that over the internet there's a lot of people saying Franklin's so annoying, he's,
I don't blame him.
This and that, but... and when I watched this recently, like I've seen the movie a bunch of different times, but when I watched this the most recent time, he wasn't as bad as I remember. Like, yes, he does have a couple moments where he kind of spazzes out and he's a bit childish at times and things like that, but I don't know, I guess he just didn't annoy me as much anymore. Maybe that's just something that wears off over time. I don't know.
It's possible. The whole thing. Well, actually, I want to say the whole hitchhiker scene. I personally, I just hate that scene. I just hate the whole manic personality of, I forget what his character's name is, but I just really hate that character, and I definitely hated him in the second movie.
Well, talking about the hitchhiker, like I always compare him now to all these different people who are like amateur photographers, like. Everyone thinks they can do photography now, and I always compare them to this guy, like taking shitty photos. Like, it's good.
I feel like he's just an entrepreneur trying to do the best he can.
Maybe if he had a better camera, like his Nikons or some shit.
It might also help if he was, insane. But I think we can. Well, I'll just say that I think he's probably one of the most unbearable members of the family. I really like the, I guess, quote unquote most normal guy. He's a lot of fun. He's charming in his own way. As far as some guy kidnapping a woman to consume his charming, but at least you can tell that he can get by in the world by acting okay, which obviously could have saved with the Leatherface or the hitchhiker guy. No, I'm always intrigued because I was born in the 90s. Whenever I watch a movie from the maybe 70s or early 80s, just seeing the way that gas stations and stores looked back then, it just always blows my mind because it just seems so, I guess for lack of a better word, so archaic. It just you can definitely tell the age of this movie when watching it, and I think it's that's much to its benefit. Because I know what's the last Gore Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie? Maybe the remake.
Texas Chainsaw 3D.
See, I didn't care for that one, but hey, to each their own.
I'm sure at some point, maybe 3 years from now, we'll discuss that movie, but it does have some things going for it. It does have a certain actress with very nice boobies.
If that's all it takes for you.
Oh yeah.
But, hey, I'm okay with that. I think we can agree though, even if Texas Chainsaw 3D is like an unsung masterpiece, the series of it was a bit of a jumbled mess.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little all over the place.
Which, you can say the same thing for Halloween, but at least Halloween had a little more consistency.
Busta Rhymes, yeah.
Well, I'm not, okay. Every series has its problems.
Yeah, well, look, back to this movie. I do like the way the movie opens. I like the little, speech at the end where they kind of introduce the movie, and kind of the first thing we see is that dead body propped up. I really like that opening. There's not too many movies that open with imagery like that. But yes, the acting is pretty eh. Some characters might stand out a little bit more than others, and some are terrible actors. And I guess another thing that helps it make it feel less like a movie is that I don't recall any music being played in this movie. Maybe at one scene there's like a small little bit of like background strings or something. I don't know what it is. And maybe someone hitting on a fucking trash can like a drum or something. I don't know, but outside of that, there's like no music in this movie. So
yeah, I think that's what's one of the most impressive things about Leatherface's opening, because a lot of modern day movies sort of have some type of loud noise when Leatherface first appears, but he just pops up, grabs the guy, and then slams the door, and that's it. It's like there might be like you said, a little reverberation like afterwards, but a lot of modern movies would not have been, I guess you could say, subtle in that approach. So I really like what this movie's going for, and I have no problem calling it a classic. And I definitely don't think it's Tobe Hooper's best movie, which I know some controversy getting thrown here, but I really do appreciate it. I've seen it so many times and I've just never really enjoyed it. So this is pretty much the same rating I've always given it. So I'm giving it just below average at 6.5, but I will round up to a 7 out of 10, just for the sake of my reputation.
Or whatever little reputation you have left.
I know. After not knowing who Sharon Stone is, that's a wind out the window.
Yeah. So, yeah, I really struggle with my rating for this one because there's so many different ways I could rate it. Look, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. I'm certainly not going to go any higher than an 8. There are times where I may even consider a 7, but yeah, it's just, just rewind, listen to everything we've already said about the movie. You don't need me to say anything else. It's a gritty movie. It doesn't have really any music in the movie. It's got some decent imagery at times. Some spastic characters that sometimes ruin parts of the movie, but overall, considering the location, the budget, just everything to do with the movie, I think it's enjoyable in a bunch of different ways. And one thing I forgot to mention, and I mentioned this during when we discussed Slaughterhouse, there's a scene that I talked about that kind of stuck with me a little bit more than anything else in the movie, which was just a scene where that Buddy character was sitting down just kind of looking at a dead animal.
Yeah.
Kind of like a personal reflection scene or something. And that seems to be similar to a scene in this movie where after Leatherface kills a few of these kids, he kind of freaks out, like, because this kid just kind of ran in out of nowhere, I guess, and he killed them, and he's kind of freaking out, wondering where, where are all these fucking kids coming from? they're just, like, transported into my house all of a sudden. But, like, after he kind of freaks out for a little bit, he kind of sits down and just kind of sits there a little bit, and, that in the same way, that scene is probably the most memorable scene for me. Just a scene where he's just sitting down thinking. You're kind of wondering exactly what's going through his head, and something about that stands out more than anything else to me.
I also want to throw in kudos. This movie has what might be, I mean, everybody knows it, but it might be one of my favorite taglines: the who will survive and what will be left of them. Which I always thought that was... It's simple, but I always thought it was a lot of fun. Even though the movie itself isn't really all that grisly. So, I mean, it's impressive, like, this movie has such a reputation that, many people who may not have seen it, just imagine it being a lot, quote-unquote, worse than it actually was.